died at the hands of a police officer who fired a gun that discharged a bullet and a life was lost. There's the principle of proportionality. There's the principle of proportionality, and those protocols that actually align the principle of proportionality need to be understood. There was no reason for that police officer to pull a gun and discharge that gun. She wasn't carrying a firearm. The principles of proportionality should not permit anyone to pull a firearm, a police officer, if there isn't a firearm in possession of the individual. That needs to tighten up the protocol to the point that that discretion is removed. That discretion doesn't remain to allow for rogue behaviour. That proportional principle must be understood and reflected 100% in terms of protocols. Ms. Clark was failed lifelong by a system that doesn't understand its unmet needs, that doesn't provide for its unmet needs, that doesn't do away with its unmet needs. But Ms. Clark was also reflective, representative and thematic of thousands, not hundreds, but thousands of individuals in like and akin circumstance. She was failed as a child, she was failed as a teenager, she was failed by the services that weren't there for her, she was failed by our governments that didn't provide for the services that should be there for her, for the outreach that is forever never at hand. She was failed into aberrance and she was failed into prison. She was failed during the prison experience. She was failed post-release from the prison experience. She was failed with the transition that never happened. She was failed with the lack of support that should have happened. I'm going to make a comment that will be damning, not just of police, but of society, because the police shouldn't have had to respond to that incident, to the distress of that household. Had I, or Megan Cracker, or Sandy Davies, or Deb Woods been contacted to respond to that household, Ms. Clark would still be alive today and would have been validated. I am forever disappointed in our state government. Western Australia is the backwater of our nation as a social justice champion. It isn't a social justice champion. It is the backwater of our nation, draconian laws. Today, finally in operation, is the Custody Notification Service. 20 years after the New South Wales government implemented the Custody Notification Service, 21 years in 1998 and then with a legislative caveat in 2005, 21 years. The unpaid fines, the defaulting of unpaid fines, first port of call, jail. First port of call, jail by Fines Enforcement Registrar could issue warrants of commitment to see people jailed. That was prohibited in 1988. 31 years ago in New South Wales. It's taken 31 years to get some amendments to the Fines Enforcement Act to prohibit the first port of call of jail by a Fines Enforcement Registrar to issue a warrant of commitment. 31 years, and the legislative changes haven't gotten through Parliament yet. They've got to go through two houses. We've still got that little bit of a way. But let's not forget that the reason that people cannot pay these fines is because they cannot afford these fines. The next step should have been income-sized assessment of these fines. Income-sized fines according to income bracket. The Scandinavians do not jail the poor. Australia does, and Western Australia at an even higher rate. Western Australia remains the backwater of this nation. Because 1 in 13 of all First Nations adult males is in prison today. From a racialised lens, highest in the world. Not just in the nation, but highest in the world. 1 in 5 of all First Nations people living in Western Australia have been to prison. 1 in 5. That's an abomination. Moral, political, it's reprehensible, diabolical. 1 in 5. But if you're living below the poverty line and living in Western Australia and our First Nations, 1 in 3 have been to prison. Western Australia remains a backwater. The only way it can be redressed is by legislative changes, by laws being redressed, repaired, by new laws that are compassionate, and by systemic changes in all our health layers. And that means, for the foremost, the one thing that I will argue above all others, in addition to primary, secondary and allied health care, is that outreach workers are the major port of call of investment from here onwards. Outreach workers. You can't do things without an in-person support. You can't do things without an on-tap nature in terms of 24/7. Outreach, psychosocial expertise should have been at that door of that household of Miss Clark on that day. She would be with us here today and she would be supported here today. If I just say one last thing, because I'm just reflecting on a young boy that died here in Geraldton several years ago. And I know it's still close at heart, the grief. His name, he was 10 years old, he was 11 actually, he was 11 years old, his name was Peter Little. Peter Little. He died needlessly. He died because of systemic failures. He died because our state government did not do all the things that we're actually asking of them today. So how many more young children, older individuals such as him, others, Miss Clark, is it going to take? I warned at that time that that young boy's mother was at risk, that young boy's mother was at risk. 9 months later, his mum took her life. His mum took her life. The state government heard those calls and those cries and those warnings and those alerts from myself and from people, others like myself. Yet nothing was put in place. Miss Manglamara, 10 years old, died in Luma, a Kalambaroo child that died in Luma on May 9, 2016. The services had failed her too, exactly the same as the services had failed the young Peter Little boy, because the services weren't supported, didn't have the outreach, didn't have the capacity, didn't have the resources that only government can provide. So I don't forget young Peter Little. I don't forget. And young Peter Little is buried very close to Miss Dew. And it's been said that the Custody Notification Service was galvanised as a result of Miss Dew's death on August 4, 2014. I received calls that day from both sides of the families, and it was a pronounced tragedy. It was an avoidable tragedy. It should never have happened. But in fact, the calls for the Custody Notification Service began 3 years prior for Western Australia, 3 years prior. Had those calls been heeded, Miss Dew would still be alive today. Miss Dew was incarcerated or locked up in that police watch house because of unpaid fines. She would be with us today, as others who will be lost, most definitely, in the years to come, in the days, weeks, months, years to come, will be lost unless what we're calling for today is heeded.